My topic is Homa psychotherapy, and an integral part of Homa psychotherapy, which is called the Mind Training Program. And in a nutshell, one can think of Homa psychotherapy like this. Uh, when I'm working with clients, that means quote unquote doing Homa psychotherapy. Uh, there are three levels I find. Ideally, I can introduce Agnihotra to a patient or a client. Now, the only problem with that is more often than not, I lose them as clients within not too long a time because Agnihotra does a large portion of the therapy. The second level would be that the place where I do the therapy, even if I never tell the people about Agnihotra, the place has been charged or energized. So that helps my work, makes it easier. The third level would be if I'm, say, meeting a client at my office or a place where I don't do Agnihotra, like my favorite coffee shop in Krakow, an hour from the farm here. The fact that I do Agnihotra helps me practice Homa psychotherapy. And, you know, for those of you who aren't so well versed in psychotherapy, it's not brain surgery. That's why I don't have an MD. It's psychology. And psychotherapy is, in more cases than not, talk therapy. You talk with people and help them through their situation. Now, one reason that I do psychotherapy, well, first let me go back to Agnihotra. Krupa said that this program was important, and certainly I share that view. That's why I live in Poland, because I wanted to come to this eco-village that is based on Agnihotra. And even though Sri Vasant was telling us 45 years ago how vital Agnihotra and Homa therapy are, now it has changed from being vital to being, not to sound too hyperbolic, but it's almost just a life-saving situation. And that's because of Corona, and that's because of climate change. Because both of those things affect everybody. Even those who don't believe in climate change might believe in Corona now, although there's some people who don't believe in that either. But leaving that aside, because Agnihotra affects the mind, it can affect all of our physical, spiritual, and mental or psychological health. And it was mentioned by a couple of the speakers over these last 3 days, the modus operandi for that, which in a nutshell is atmosphere, prana, mind. You change the atmosphere through Homa, through Agnihotra. It affects the prana, the subtle energy that connects us to the cosmos. And because, as has been said, prana and mind are like two sides of the same coin, you have affected positive changes in mind because of what you've done to prana. Now, understand, Agnihotra is not the only way to affect prana. Pranayama is a very good way of affecting mind. But my experience is, and of my clients, is that why not do both? Why not do pranayama in the atmosphere of Agnihotra? Then you've got the best of both worlds. Besides atmosphere, prana, mind, I wanted to say 4 words that we were also taught way back in the beginning. Believe what you experience. Believe what you experience. Even though I know that what I tell you might sound very impressive, don't believe me. Believe what you experience. Now, my guess is that most of you watching do Agnihotra. My guess also is that some of you may not do Agnihotra twice a day, every day, for different reasons. Well, I wanted to tell you a very short story of what we were told by Sri Vasant Paranjape, and that is that if one could harness the energy from just one Agnihotra, you can't harness that energy, but if you could, hypothetically, if you could harness the energy from one Agnihotra, he said, you could light New York City for a year. And you could probably throw in Mumbai and Chicago for all of you in Chicago. So what that says to me is that even though, you know, I might want to do hatha yoga a couple times a week, maybe even every day, pranayama, Agnihotra I don't miss. Because, number one, in theory of what I just said, that story, but also because I'm kind of selfish, because the feeling that I get from it is not something that I want to give up. So even though today was the earliest sunrise of the year, probably everywhere, I guess, at least in the northern hemisphere, and it was 4:29 this morning here in Poland, even though it's that early, getting up is not a problem. Of course, going back to sleep is also an option. So, believe what you experience, an atmosphere, prana, mind. I want to try to play a short tape that I recorded 2 days ago. And this tells about me a little bit. So let's see how this goes. So those of you who are especially perceptive will see that one difference between my talk and those of my predecessors is that the experimental animal, if you will, is speaking to you. In Bruce's talk, I don't recall a soybean plant talking to you, telling you how it thrives in Homa therapy atmosphere. Actually,
sorry to interrupt, but we cannot see the video.
Sorry, it's not loud enough?
No, we are not able to see the video.
There is nothing to see. It's only words. Speaking to you. In Bruce's talk.
Sorry, it's not loud enough. Can you put up the volume?
I'll try, otherwise we'll just... Talking to you. How about this? Telling you how it thrives in Homa therapy atmosphere. Actually, there was... Is that okay, Ulrich? Evidence of a patient or two in Abel's talk of their recovery. But here, in my case, you have the experimental subject live and in living color, as they used to say. Why do I say this? Because in October of 1975,
while I was attending a 4.5-hour group therapy session in Baltimore, Maryland, USA. The psychiatrist who was leading the group announced to the 22 clients or patients in the room, quote, "Those of you who would like to go into the next room with Ross," Ross was the psychologist working with the...
Okay, I'm going to bring this to real time. The other part of that story is that was the first time I experienced Agnihotra. And I was trying to come out of a very deep depression at that time. And Agnihotra, which I started 2 months later after experiencing it 4 or 5 times, turned my life around and eventually turned me into a therapist who didn't need therapy again for like 40 years or so. So, one part of the Homa psychotherapy program is actually a fairly strong emphasis on addiction, Now, those of you who are not addicts, raise your hand. Ah, good. What did I say? Raise your hand or don't raise your hand. Anyway, the point is this. It's been said by Sri Vasan, also by Carolyn Mace, by the way, who's a brilliant New Age teacher, that, and don't get depressed by this, she and he both said that all human beings are addicts. Full stop. All human beings are addicts. Now, granted, there's a difference between a bad habit and an addiction, but both interfere with our lives. And what has been called in Sri Vasant's book, Light Towards Divine Path, a brilliant small book written in 1976, he speaks about the 6 crocodiles that are always snipping at our minds and taking us out of being happy. Those 6 crocodiles being anger, lust, greed, attachment, pride, and jealousy. So, from time to time, all of us are probably troubled by one or more of those things. So, how do we do what we were promised when we started doing these fires? Which was happiness not followed by unhappiness. Happiness not followed by unhappiness. Now, in my work with those with drug addictions, you know, a person uses drugs to try to be happy, right? You don't usually try to do things that make you unhappy, although some people do that too, but we're not going to go there. But basically, we're all trying to be happy, yeah? And doing drugs doesn't accomplish it. Now, here's a controversial statement, so I hope you all are sitting down. Agnihotra is not enough to do that, to give us happiness, not followed by unhappiness. Why is that? Because this is not the one-fold path. This is the five-fold path. So, there are 5 disciplines, as most of you know, but some of you may not, because we talk so much about fire. There are 4 other disciplines that are part of the fivefold path. Those are, number 2 is dana, sharing our assets in a spirit of humility. Tapa is number 3, self-discipline. Karma, living our lives in consonance with we reap as we sow. What goes around comes around. And finally, a brilliant Sanskrit word that nobody can spell correctly, swadhyaya, swadhyaya, Swadhyaya. And I promise Krupa, by my next talk, I will learn Devanagari and I will put it on the screen. But don't hold your breath because I still haven't learned Polish after 11 years. Now, it has been said, believe it or not, that there's an actual mathematical interpretation of what I just said. I wouldn't hold myself to it, but it is illustrative. And that is this. It's been said that Agnihotra is 40% of the fivefold path, 40%. So that means the other 4 disciplines, dana, tapa, karma, swadhyaya, comprise 60%. If we assume that each of those 4 are of equal value, which is an assumption and not measurable probably, one could say each of those 4 is 15%, which still makes Agnihotra nearly 3 times more important than any of those 4. And this, by the way, since, I've been teaching this since 1976, is kind of what makes this path, in my experience, different than some others. That means, you'll meet people who their path is mostly Hatha Yoga or Bhakti Yoga or Shakti Yoga or whatever. So I might say to them, well, okay, just Agnihotra because it'll make it easier for you. It'll make it easier. And with rare exceptions, most people want things to be easier. Now, fast forward to today. Today, we're living in a world where there's so much talk about the immune system in terms of coronavirus. Now, the mind, which by definition includes thinking, willing, and feeling. Thinking, willing, and feeling. The mind is connected to the immune system. In the brilliant article that Dr. Burke published about 6 weeks ago about coronavirus and Agnihotra, he mentions some studies that were done, one in Chile and one in Russia, the Soviet Union, about the effect of stress on the immune system. Now, many people have been asking, well, what about Agnihotra and coronavirus? And as Ulrich's article correctly pointed out, we have not done studies yet to show that. Number one, because they're costly. Number two, because corona hasn't been around long enough for anyone to have done a conclusive study. However, a pilot study done in Mysore showed very interesting results about the effect of Agnihotra on a different virus, namely HIV/AIDS. So, even though we do have controlled, peer-reviewed, I believe, studies of Agnihotra effects on bacteria, coronavirus is a virus, it's not a bacteria. But the study on HIV/AIDS shows promise, even though after 40 years, they still haven't come up with a vaccine for HIV/AIDS, although they have come up with treatments which extend life. I just wanted to say a little bit about these other 4 aspects of the fivefold path, because this is an important part of Homa psychotherapy. And by the way, you should know, we do have what's called the in-residence Homa therapy drug and alcohol detoxification program. We have this on paper. It's also, I believe most of it's on my website, homapsychotherapy.com. And it deals with a lot of what I'm speaking about, including dana, tapa, karma, and swadhyaya. Now, an interesting little side note about the 6 crocodiles. One of them is attachment. Attachment usually means attachment to material objects. I was driving Srivasant in Washington, D.C. some 40 years ago, and we were looking for a building to house Agnihotra University. And we were visiting different places, and including church rectories, the houses next to churches where the minister lived or whatever. And we came out of one house, and Sri said to me, you know, did you notice all of the objects in that house? Or as in the vernacular, all of the tchotchkes? The statues, the things on the wall, the jewelry, this, that, you know, everywhere. I said, yes. He said, do you know, it takes several lifetimes to overcome the attachment to such objects. Several lifetimes, several lifetimes. So as depressing as that sounds, and as much as I'd like my house to look a little more zen, although it does in the background here a bit, I didn't forget that. But what I also remembered was another thing he said once about several lifetimes. He said, with this fivefold path, the anchor of which, of course, is Agnihotra, the average householder can accomplish in this very lifetime what would take yogis many, many lifetimes to accomplish. And as fabulous a statement as that is, it was almost as hard to believe as the title of one of his books, Homa Therapy, Our Last Chance. When that book came out in like 1980 or 81 or 82, some of us thought that that title might be a little dramatic, a little much hyperbole or something, because in 1980, people couldn't even spell pollution, much less smell it or feel it. Well, fast forward to 50 years from 1980, 40 years, and look around us. I'm told that in Delhi now you can see the Himalayas because of the lockdown, because of no rickshaws, no cars, no buses, no planes, which just gives a sample of how bad pollution is now. And once Corona is over and people start concentrating again on climate change, then we'll see if Agnihotra gets into that discussion too. And even though we say we're trying to heal the planet, if we can't heal the whole planet, at least those who've set up the Homa farms that Bruce suggested day before yesterday, the farm like Brugu-Aranya, in which I sit at the moment, those will be sanctuaries for those who know that you cannot raise your children and grandchildren in cities as they exist today. Okay, you want to do like a Bhopal type experiment? TK, I went to Bhopal 2 months after the accident in 1984, I believe, and spoke to families who survived because of 2 things. They survived because they do Agnihotra, and because the night of the accident, they started doing Om Trambakam Yajna for hours. And it was not an experiment, a controlled experiment, but we spoke to 4 or 5 families who lived near Union Carbide in Bhopal. So, yes, look, everybody has, we say this in therapy, you know, the anonymous programs are part of Homa Psychotherapy, Alcoholics Anonymous, Marijuana Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous. And what is the slogan for that? It's the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So, what can Barry change? I can change Barry, and believe me, as Ulrich will attest, that is a full-time job. I'm glad you're muted, Ulrich. We can change ourselves, but we can also teach others. We can also be examples to others, and we can let people know about Agnihotra and fivefold path. What they do with that information is up to them, but it is a knowledge, it is a tool. It is a tool. And just last thing about this, the other 4 aspects of fivefold path. If you think of Agnihotra as opening the door to many things, that's great. You might think of the other 4 aspects as including walking into the room of the door you've just opened and then doing what we need to do. Because we've been told, for example, swadhyaya, self-study, an effort to answer the question, why am I here? What is my job to do during this lifetime? Swadhyaya, it has been said, is a 24-hour job. It's not like, I saw once, there was a commercial about the internet when it first came out, and the husband walks into the room and tells the wife, I've just finished surfing the internet. I finished. Well, just like you can't finish surfing the internet, you can't finish swadhyaya, perhaps until we've taken our last breath and totally surrendered. So, what else? A little bit more about this mind training program. The introduction to the mind training program, which again is on that website, homapsychotherapy.com, says this: in many endeavors of life, we are taught by someone or something how to function. In every case, we are taught the basics first. That is, you crawl before you walk. In most things we learn, the basics continue to be the focus of the teacher's efforts because they can never be forgotten if we are to be successful. The mind training program is the foundation upon which we are able to build a life, as it says here, free of drugs and alcohol. But I'm going to say also free of any addictions or bad habits that we have. Because many of you are knowing about samskara. Samskara. What is samskara? Basically, if you could only define it in one word, you could say habits or old impressions on the mind. So Agnihotra helps dilute those old impressions on the mind. What is different about Homa therapy is that you are given material and mental aids to uplift your state of mind without drugs. And then, as I said earlier, this very important concept of stress. Now, if you guys could talk back to me now, I would ask you to, what are your three main stressors? Some of you might say your job, except most of you have no jobs now because the whole world is locked down. You could say your spouse. Oh boy, could I show this? I'm going to show this because this is the best 60-second thing that I've seen about the coronavirus and about lockdown. And please forgive me for not being able to resist, and indulge me for 30 seconds. And let's see. Oh, if I can't find this, I'm going to be upset. Okay, I'll just have to tell you about it. This is this is a gentleman who's, it goes like this. Because of the coronavirus, you've been given two choices. You can either lock down with your wife and child, or B, and he immediately says B. B. Doesn't matter what B is, I'm not going to be locked down with my wife and child. Okay? So I'm sorry I can't find it, but it's great. It's a joke, but at the same time, Corona is creating very stressful situations. The statistics on child abuse and spousal abuse and alcoholism are going through the roof during Corona lockdown, especially in the United States. I don't know the figures from other countries. So, job, spouse, money, worry, fear, desires. These are sources of stress. And these are, as we talked about the 6 crocodiles, the things that Agnihotra are meant to help. So those of you who do Agnihotra occasionally, or, when I teach Agnihotra, people say, well, I can't do it at sunset because I'm at work. And I say, do you drive a car? And they say, yes. And I say, well, go do it in your car. The reason we have these travel kits, these Agnihotra travel kits, which are available in many places, including the website for the Eco Village here, agnihotra.pl, like Poland, PL. They sell these wooden boxes that you can carry around and do Agnihotra in your car. Like I said earlier, I don't miss it. So if I'm at work, I take a 10-minute coffee break without coffee and do Agnihotra. The Agnihotra Buddy Sunrise Sunset app tells us the exact time to the second of wherever we are. So that used to be a difficulty in the old days. It's not anymore. So we can do Agnihotra all the time. If we don't have a car, I tell people to find a non-conspicuous spot, in a garden or a forest or something, and just do a small fire. Occasionally, people are going to miss it, but my mantra there is, where there's a will, there's a way. I think, Krupa, if there are some questions, I see some raised hands. I'm open to starting to address them. And then, since I've been known to talk longer during an answer, that'll take time also.
Okay. We have got 2-3 hands. So I'll unmute Mr. Hemant Dubli from New Jersey to please ask the question.
Thank you very much. And you said there are 6 crocodiles. One is anger. What is the second one? Third is greed. Fourth is attachment. Then fifth is pride. And sixth one is jealousy. What is the second one?
Lust, L-U-S-T.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Which might explain, by the way, why one of the 10 commandments of Paramasadguru Sri Gajananand Maharaj is brahmacharya. And that, of course, is connected with lust.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this answer. Okay, next hand is of Amara. Amara, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah. This question I would like to ask is about the drug addiction. You were talking about you treated patients through psychotherapy, am I right? All the drug addictors. So I would like to know, what are the causes do you think that makes one to take up the drugs and get addicted to it?
Yeah, if I had the answer to that one, I would be rich and famous instead of just famous. Causes of addiction. There's, in Alcoholics Anonymous programs, addiction is called a disease. It's called a disease, not a character fault, not a lack of willpower, but an actual disease, not unlike, perhaps, let's say, diabetes. So that would explain, according to that model, why one person can have a sip of wine or a glass of wine with dinner and then just leave it. Whereas a true alcoholic would not be able to leave it. And a true alcoholic drinks to get high. A person who drinks wine at dinner is not necessarily drinking to get high. Maybe a bit of stress relief, maybe taste, whatever. But so there's that. Now, whether that's genetic or not, I think is a bit controversial. You do find addiction in families, but some of that could be from the child watching the parent rather than having a gene necessarily of addiction. Does that help with the answer, Amara?
Yeah, okay. Another question is, can you just elaborate a little about mind training techniques? You were
Sure.
talking about the mind training techniques.
Yeah.
So does that help with drug addictors?
Yes.
Does it have an effect on them?
Yeah, it's an important part of the drug addiction program, and mind training deals in part with classes. There's like 10 classes that deal with habit patterns, that deal with stress. Of course, it deals with Agnihotra. That's class number 4. This mind training program is at that website, by the way, homapsychotherapy.com, and then you click on Homa Therapy. That's one of the choices. And then you'll see the drug de-addiction program and the mind training program. And that will give you in detail what you're asking about. It would be too long to list now.
Okay, thank you so much.
Welcome.
Okay, we'll move to the next question from Sonia. Sonia Mishra, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, thanks very much. I'm Sonia. I'm calling from Singapore. It's really very interesting with this seminar. I learned a lot. And I practice Agnihotra every evening, just once a day, every evening without fail. And I have a mug of water, and I refill the mug water with Agnihotra ash. And this Agnihotra I've been drinking this water for months without refilling it with new ash. The water is always very, very clear. No matter how much Agnihotra I add into it, the water is always clear. When the water runs low, I just keep adding the water. Is this good enough, or should I clear the mug and add in new fresh ash with clean water?
Yeah. I'm not the expert in this, but from my experience, I would say either way would be okay. I would lean towards replacing all of it after, let's say a month or two. But
Okay.
even if you didn't, I wouldn't worry so much about it. I will say this, however, as has been said in previous days, it is ideal that if one is going to eat Agnihotra ash or use it as a home folk remedy or put it in water, as you say, ideally that ash should come from an Agnihotra that has been performed by one who has taken bath or shower and put on clean clothes. So
Yes.
what I do is I have 2 storage glass containers for my Agnihotra ash. One for ash from Agnihotras where I have taken bath and put on clean clothes, and one from the times that I either, at work or in the car or something where I can't take bath. I keep that ash separate. And that's pretty important, actually, especially if you're using the ash as medicine.
Good. Thanks very much.
Welcome.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Barry, for this wonderful explanation. I don't see any more hands raised. So would you like to say something more about your experiences about Agnihotra?
Sure. Here's an important part of, the thing with Agnihotra is, you might say it's not everyone's cup of chai. At least that's how they say it in India. In America, they'd say it's not everyone's cup of tea. Because granted, it's a little unusual, especially those from the West, to be doing a process like this. And even though New Age people in the West understand ritual and such things, we don't really consider Agnihotra a ritual. We really consider it a science. If you want to do it as a ritual, no problem. But then people say, well, if you're calling it a science, can you explain a little bit why you say that? So we might say, for example, something about the science of breath, the science of breath. And this is from the mind training program. The scientist has come to know that in addition to our physical body, we are also wearing a second body. Sometimes it is referred to as bioplasma body or bioluminescence. It is beyond the scalpel of the surgeon. That is a very important statement, because when we talk about mind training, we're not talking about the brain. You have a problem with your brain, you can go to a brain surgeon. You have a problem with your mind, there is no mind surgeon. The closest is a psychotherapist. But it's subtle. It's not whatever the opposite of subtle is. It's not gross like a brain. So, for example, if a person's arm has been amputated and you photograph the person with a special type of photography, Kirlian photography might be it, some energy body can still be seen where the physical arm used to be. It is on this body that emotions appear. Advanced photography could show a different pattern on the second body when love comes rather than when anger comes. Now, anger is part of the 6 crocodiles. Some psychologists say, what's wrong with anger? You know, it's good. Go scream, go yell, get it out of you. If you knew what happens to the body when you get angry, you wouldn't want to do that. So better to sublimate the emotions, put it at the feet of the master, however you want to say it. Anger is not a good thing. It is to be avoided at all costs. So, there was a brilliant Japanese scientist named Dr. Emoto. And I'm bringing him up because of this subtle aspects of Agnihotra. So what he did was, first, he used to take bottles of water and then write on the bottle on a piece of paper and attach it to the bottle, anger, anger. Then he would take a second bottle of water. He would take on the piece of paper, write the word love, attach it to the bottle, and then he would observe what happened to the 2 bottles of water over time. And he has written a book about this. He actually has a whole chapter about Agnihotra in it, because he saw the effects that Agnihotra had on water. Dr. Burke talked about this, some experiments with ash being thrown into the Narmada River in Madhya Pradesh, and how that affected the water in a positive way. Yeah. One other interesting story I'll tell, since I have some time. In, I think, 1982, Sri Vasant asked me to drive him to West Virginia from Baltimore, Maryland. It's about a 2.5-hour drive. Why? He was meeting with the author of the eventually published book, Secrets of the Soil. This was the same author who had written Secret Life of Plants with a companion some years earlier. And he had heard about Agnihotra and the effect that it had on plants and farming. And those of you lucky enough to have heard Bruce Johnson's talk 2 days ago and to have seen the video of Bhrigu Aranya yesterday will see the amazing effects that Agnihotra has on plants. So they interviewed Sri Vasant. He wrote 17 pages about Agnihotra in the Secrets of the Soil. This book, I'm sure it's available. It may not still be in print because this was like 45 years ago. But if you can get a hold of it, it's very interesting. And, you know, speaks a little to some more scientific aspects of Agnihotra. And by the way, any of you who may be knowing scientists or laboratories or such who would be interested in helping us carry forward experiments with Agnihotra in terms of coronavirus or many other parameters, we would very much like to hear about those people, write to them, meet them perhaps, and one can contact Dr. Burke, one can contact me, and we would take that the next step.